history did not just punish people, it got weirdly creative about it. In this video, we are looking at 33 punishments so absurd, cruel, and bizarre, they feel less like law and more like someone in power saying, "I have an idea and it is terrible." From iron masks to goat islands, this is justice with way too much imagination. 1. Imagine being invited to dinner by the Roman Emperor Domitian and realizing halfway through the appetizer that the whole evening has been decorated like your funeral. The walls were black, the servants wore black, the food looked like it had been catered by Death himself, and right in front of every guest stood a tombstone engraved with his name. That was the joke. Or rather, that was the psychological torture. Domitian loved terrifying senators and rivals without technically killing them, which is such a deeply Roman abuse of interior design. The guests sat there expecting an execution at any second, too scared to speak, chew, or breathe incorrectly. Then, after marinating them in pure panic for hours, Domitian simply let them go home. No blood, no blade, just a carefully staged reminder that their lives depended entirely on his mood. 2. Medieval fairs were supposed to be cheerful places full of trade, noise, ale, and questionable hygiene. But if a petty thief got caught working the crowd, the punishment could turn the whole market into a comedy show. In some places, the offender was blindfolded and forced to chase a pig that had been greased up like it was preparing for the Olympics. Picture the scene: a terrified pickpocket stumbling through mud, arms flailing, while one extremely slippery pig runs circles around him and the crowd laughs itself silly. It was public humiliation disguised as entertainment, which, honestly, was one of medieval Europe's favorite hobbies. The message was simple. You wanted to make a fool of honest people by stealing from them? Fine. Now the town gets to watch you become the fool instead. 3. Ancient Rome had many punishments, but when it came to parricide, meaning murdering your own parent or close family elder, the Romans decided ordinary execution was not dramatic enough. Their answer was poena cullei, the punishment of the sack, which sounds weird already and then gets worse at Olympic speed. The convicted person was sewn into a leather sack with a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster, then thrown into water to drown in total chaos. Why those animals? Because Rome loved symbolism almost as much as it loved overthinking revenge. The point was not just death. It was moral horror, social disgust, and a message that killing the people who gave you life put you outside the human order itself. Rome really looked at family murder and said, no, this needs more wildlife. 4. Selling bad wine in the ancient or medieval world was not treated like a small customer service issue. Wine was daily life, social glue, medicine adjacent, and in many places safer than water. So if a tavern owner got caught watering it down or serving a disgusting batch, the law in some regions answered with perfect poetic cruelty. Drink it, all of it. Every last drop of your own fraudulent sludge. That meant no clever excuses, no refund policy, no manager coming over to help, just the seller being forced to swallow the nasty product until he started gagging, vomiting, or begging for mercy. It was quality control by revenge, and honestly, it was brutally efficient. Nothing teaches product pride faster than being made to consume your own scam in front of everyone who already knew it tasted like a damp boot. 5. Being a bad musician today might get you a mean comment online. In parts of early modern Germany, it could get you locked into an iron instrument called the Schandfloete, or flute of shame. Despite the name, it was not musical. It was basically a heavy metal restraint shaped like a flute, clamped around the neck and hands so the victim was frozen in a ridiculous pose, like some cursed street performer. This was used on terrible minstrels, noisy troublemakers, and sometimes anyone judged to be offensively annoying. Then came the best part, if you were not the one wearing it: the public mockery. Rotten food, insults, laughter, the whole civic festival of humiliation. It was punishment designed to say, you wanted attention so badly? Congratulations. Now the entire town is paying attention for all the wrong reasons. 6. Rome had many ways to ruin a political enemy without making the situation too conveniently heroic. One of the nastier options was exile to some miserable little Mediterranean island that had almost nothing on it except rocks, wind, and, in a few famous cases, goats. Not a bustling island paradise, not a scenic retirement. More like a sunburnt prison without walls, where your audience for the next few years consisted of livestock with judging eyes. This was especially effective because Roman elites lived for influence, gossip, dinner invitations, and the ability to ruin each other in person. Strip all that away and leave a senator on a goat island, and you have achieved something worse than execution in Roman terms. You made him irrelevant. It is hard to maintain a political faction when your closest allies are four-legged and interested only in chewing bushes. 7. Medieval Italy occasionally produced punishments with the energy of a furious schoolmaster who had completely lost patience. If someone forged a legal document or wrote an insulting letter to an important noble, the penalty could be hideously literal. Eat it. Not just tear it up. Not just apologize. Actually chew and swallow the parchment itself, including the wax seal. That meant choking down thick animal skin, writing material, and a lump of hardened wax, while officials and spectators watched the performance like it was the dumbest meal in Europe. The symbolism was perfect. You created poison with your words, so now you ingest your own lie. It was humiliation, discomfort, and legal theater rolled together into one deeply unappetizing sentence. Also, let us be honest, nothing says your forgery career is over quite like being forced to dine on paperwork in public. 8. 16th-century England had a special hatred for people who turned public drunkenness into a neighborhood event. Their answer was the drunkard's cloak, which sounds cozy until you learn it was basically a giant wooden barrel with holes cut out for the head and arms. The offender got stuffed into it and paraded around town like a walking cautionary tale, sponsored by humiliation. Imagine trying to wobble through muddy streets, wearing half a pub, while everyone points, laughs, and reminds you that this whole spectacle could have been avoided by not treating the alehouse like a second home. It was a very English punishment in that it combined moral judgment, carpentry, and community sarcasm. You were not just punished for drinking too much. You were turned into the thing that caused the problem, which is honestly so petty, it loops all the way back to genius. 9. Rome's arena was not just for gladiators with polished armor and dramatic entrances. It could also be used as a profoundly cruel place to dispose of petty criminals in ways that doubled as crowd entertainment. One of the strangest examples involved the Andibatai, fighters reportedly made to battle while wearing helmets with no eye holes. So yes, blindfolded combat, but with steel and screaming. The audience loved the chaos because it turned lethal violence into slapstick with a body count. Two men stumbling around, swinging wildly, missing each other, panicking, then suddenly not missing anymore. It sounds absurd because it was absurd, but that was part of the appeal. Roman punishment often blurred the line between justice and spectacle, until the line basically packed up and left. If you stole small, Rome might decide your sentence was becoming a confused human piñata in front of cheering strangers. 10. In 17th-century Russia, cheating merchants could face punishments that were less about legal procedure and more about making sure the lesson lingered in every pore. One especially savage method reportedly involved forcing dishonest traders to eat huge amounts of raw onion and garlic, then locking them in a tiny, unventilated room to stew in their own breath. It was not elegant. It was not symbolic in some refined philosophical sense. It was just brutally direct. You made commerce foul, so now your entire existence becomes foul. Anyone who has ever eaten too much raw garlic already knows that one clove can alter your social future. Multiply that into a punishment and turn the room into a vapor chamber of regret, and suddenly, fraud looks a lot less appealing. It was public order enforced through digestive warfare, which is not classy, but it is definitely memorable. 11. Athens liked to brag about democracy, but it also understood that sometimes a city gets tired of one particularly annoying, dangerous, or suspiciously ambitious man. So it invented ostracism, a punishment where citizens voted to exile someone for 10 years by scratching his name onto broken pottery shards called ostraca. No dungeon, no chains, no melodramatic trial with thunder in the background. Just thousands of people calmly deciding that for the good of the city, you needed to go be somebody else's problem for a decade. The beauty of it was how civilized it looked compared to a coup or assassination. The insult, however, was enormous. Imagine discovering that your punishment is not death, but a citywide consensus that your personality has become intolerable. Athens basically weaponized group chat energy. Congratulations, you were not executed. You were democratically unfollowed by the entire polis. 12. Sometimes punishment did not need blades, prisons, or beatings. Sometimes all it needed was dairy products and sunlight. In parts of the Middle East and medieval Europe, petty thieves could be tied to a post with their heads smeared in thick butter and left under the blazing sun until it melted down their face. On paper, that sounds almost silly, like the world's cruelest cooking demonstration. In practice, it was a slow, sticky humiliation machine. The heat, the helplessness, the flies, the spectators, the smell, the degrading absurdity of standing there while your punishment literally drips off your forehead. It worked because it made the criminal ridiculous in a way everyone could understand. Theft was not being answered with grand martyrdom. It was being answered with public embarrassment and prolonged discomfort. Nothing says, perhaps I should reconsider my life choices, quite like becoming a human butter sculpture in summer. 13. Victorian Britain loved punishment that looked productive while actually being glorified misery with excellent branding. Enter the prison treadmill, a giant wheel-like staircase that inmates had to climb for hours every day, sometimes up to 10 hours, with no destination, no scenery, and often no useful result. You just stepped upward forever while achieving absolutely nothing except exhaustion. It was industrial age philosophy in machine form. Work is good. Suffering builds character. Also, let us see how much despair we can fit into one device. Some treadmills powered mills or pumps, but many were deliberately pointless because the whole idea was to crush the spirit through endless mechanical labor. Today, people pay money to walk nowhere on a treadmill while watching television. The Victorians would have found that hysterical. Their version came with prison walls, aching legs, and the constant reminder that your day's great accomplishment was not falling over. 14. Medieval Germany had punishments that felt less like law and more like a nobleman losing a bet with the universe. One of the strangest was forcing a peacebreaker, often a knight or minor noble, to carry a live dog on his shoulders for miles across the countryside. Not a symbolic dog, a real, heavy, squirming, probably furious dog. The punishment mattered because noble status was built on dignity, public image, and the illusion that you were a grand warrior chosen by God and good breeding. It is hard to maintain that image when you are sweating down a road with an animal digging its paws into your neck while peasants watch. The dog itself represented dishonor, but the real weapon was humiliation. Medieval justice loved making the body perform the shame. You did not just hear that you had failed socially. You physically hauled your disgrace from village to village. 15. The mask of infamy was the kind of punishment that proves humans have always loved wearable sarcasm. In parts of Europe, liars, gossips, scolds, and other repeat public nuisances could be forced to wear heavy iron masks designed to advertise exactly what they had done wrong. If you spread nonsense, your mask might have a pig snout. If you were judged foolish or disruptive, it might feature donkey ears. Subtlety had left the building. These masks were painful, hot, humiliating, and impossible to ignore, which was the whole point. The offender became a walking label. No need for gossip when the punishment itself was the announcement. It turned morality into theater, and everyone in town got front-row seats. Medieval society basically invented a metal version of public comments. You lied, stirred trouble, or flapped your mouth too much, and now your face itself had become an insult board. 16. Early America liked to present itself as practical and community-minded, which is a very charming way of saying it sometimes solved domestic drama like a village reality show. In some places, quarrelsome couples who constantly disturbed the peace could be tied together or locked in the same stocks until they settled down. The logic was almost offensively simple. You two cannot stop fighting, so now you literally cannot get away from each other. Work it out. It sounds like marriage counseling designed by people who had never heard of emotional boundaries and were proud of that fact. Neighbors could gather, laugh, comment, and enjoy the spectacle while the couple stood there marinating in mutual irritation. The punishment was not elegant justice. It was forced proximity as social pressure. Either reconcile or at least become too embarrassed to continue your public feud like unpaid actors in the colony's messiest comedy. 17. Few punishments capture the phrase poetic justice quite like molten gold being poured down the throat of a famously greedy man. The story is most often linked to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's richest power players who died after his disastrous campaign against Parthia. Ancient sources claim the victors mocked his greed by forcing gold into his mouth, as if to say, "You loved wealth so much, here, eat it." Whether every detail happened exactly that way is almost beside the point because the story survived precisely because it feels so perfect. It takes an abstract vice, greed, and gives it a brutally physical ending. Historically, rulers and enemies loved this kind of symbolic revenge. Do not just kill the traitor or the miser. Make the punishment explain the sin. Crassus chased glory and riches across the desert and got turned into a warning label for ambition with bad judgment. 18. Medieval justice often understood one thing very clearly. If you want a small crime to become a big lesson, make the punishment look unbelievably stupid. So, a vegetable thief might be forced to stand in the town square with cabbages strapped to his head like some deranged produce king. It was cheap, visible, and devastating to dignity. Everyone passing by immediately knew what the offender had stolen, which saved time and gave the crowd something to laugh at between more ordinary disappointments. The cabbage crown worked because theft was answered not with mystery or grandeur, but with mockery. The criminal became part punishment, part advertisement. Children could point, neighbors could gossip, and the victim of the theft got to enjoy a very public refund in pride, if not in produce. Medieval towns loved punishments that made sin look ridiculous, because ridicule can sting longer than a fine. 19. The whirligig sounds like something children should enjoy at a fair, which is exactly why it becomes extra disturbing when you learn it was also used as punishment. In the 19th century, disobedient soldiers could be strapped into a suspended wooden cage and spun around at frightening speed until dizziness, nausea, and violent vomiting took over. Basically, military discipline by turning a man into soup. Armies loved this kind of thing because it punished, without necessarily leaving obvious permanent wounds, while still making the experience unforgettable in the worst possible way. The victim lost control of his body, his balance, his dignity, and probably his lunch, all while superiors and spectators watched the result. It was less about pain in the heroic sense, and more about absolute helplessness. The message was clear. You failed to obey orders, so now your world will physically stop making sense until discipline comes spinning back into place. 20. Pirates in movies are always making people walk the plank because cinema loves a neat visual. Real pirate discipline was usually meaner and somehow even more insulting. A rule breaker was more likely to be marooned, dropped on a tiny deserted island or sandbar with almost nothing to survive on except maybe a bit of water, a few scraps, and often a pistol with one bullet. That single bullet was the masterpiece of psychological cruelty. It gave the victim a choice without giving him a future. Use it for hunting, save it for an enemy, save it for yourself when thirst and loneliness start chewing through your sanity. Marooning was punishment by isolation, uncertainty, and the slow collapse of hope. The crew did not need to watch you die. They just sailed away and let the horizon do the rest. Pirate justice was many things, but generous was never one of them. 21. Victorian military discipline had an almost supernatural talent for taking a simple punishment and making it weirdly theatrical. One example involved a minor offender being forced to roll a heavy cannonball across the parade ground, using only his nose while crawling on all fours. Not hands, not tools, just face, dirt, and total loss of dignity. It sounds made up by a bored sergeant who hated both physics and joy, but that was the point. The army wanted obedience drilled so deep that even a ridiculous punishment still carried authority. Every inch of the ground became a lesson in humiliation. Fellow soldiers watched, officers judged, and the victim became a crawling advertisement for what happened when you stepped out of line. It was not efficient. It was not noble. It was not even remotely sane. but it was unforgettable, and institutions obsessed with discipline often value unforgettable over reasonable. 22. Shaving exactly half of a criminal's head and beard was one of those punishments that proves humiliation can do more social damage than a whip. This was used in various cultures, including among samurai-era authorities and medieval communities, because hair mattered. Hair signaled honor, adulthood, status, masculinity, discipline, identity. So if officials wanted to make someone look ridiculous at a single glance, they did not need chains. They just turned him into a walking visual disaster. One side groomed, one side stripped, like a barber had suffered a moral crisis halfway through. The power of the punishment came from visibility. You could not hide it, explain it away, or pretend nothing had happened. Every street became a courtroom full of eyes. It was especially cruel in honor-based societies, where appearance and reputation were not shallow extras. They were social currency, and this punishment deliberately set fire to the wallet. 23. Victorian prisons were obsessed with breaking the mind through routine, monotony, and pointless labor. The crank machine was one of their finest nightmares. A prisoner had to stand in his cell and turn a heavy handle over and over, sometimes thousands upon thousands of times a day, often with no useful result at all. Nothing was powered. Nothing was produced. The machine existed mainly to eat hours, energy, and morale. Guards could even tighten the resistance just to make the whole experience more miserable, because apparently ordinary despair was not enough. The genius of the device was that it looked like work while functioning as psychological sandpaper. You were exhausted, yet you had accomplished absolutely nothing that proved you were still a human being with purpose. It was punishment by mechanical futility. Imagine spending your entire day helping no one, creating nothing, and still being expected to feel grateful for the exercise. 24. Medieval towns had a very direct idea of how to punish theft. If you stole something, officials might literally hang that stolen item around your neck and parade you through public view. Take meat, and you wear the rotting meat. Steal tools, and now you are accessorized like the worst shop display in Europe. In extreme stories, even absurdly heavy objects like metal goods could become part of the punishment, which tells you everything about how little comfort was considered a right. The beauty of the method was its clarity. No legal explanation needed. The object itself testified against you. Everyone could see the crime hanging from your body like a label of shame. It turned stolen property into a costume and the criminal into a walking confession. Medieval justice loved that kind of efficiency. Why waste words when you can let a thief parade around town dressed as the evidence? 25. Roman emperors who failed badly enough did not just risk death. Sometimes they risked something arguably more terrifying to a narcissist: deletion. Damnatio memoriae was the practice of condemning a person's memory after death or disgrace. Their names were chiseled off inscriptions, their faces hacked off statues, and every public reminder of them was attacked like history itself was trying to scrub a stain out of marble. It was not always fully successful because, ironically, the attempt to erase someone often made later historians more interested in them. Still, the intention was savage. Rome was saying, you were not merely a bad ruler. You were an embarrassment so complete that even your memory needs punishment. In a world obsessed with legacy, monuments, and public honor, this was social death on an imperial scale. The empire basically looked at certain emperors and said, "Congratulations, you are now being edited out." 26. Bread was serious business in pre-modern towns. It fed the poor, stabilized the market, and if bakers cheated on weight, people got angry very quickly. That is why some communities developed punishments that were half regulation and half revenge fantasy. A baker caught selling loaves that were too light might be tied to a chair and repeatedly dunked into filthy water or even raw sewage, often near the same market where he had been cheating customers. It was called the baker's baptism in some retellings, which is darkly funny in exactly the way medieval justice liked. The symbolism could not be clearer. You polluted the trust of the town, so now the town pollutes you. Also, nobody who has been dipped in sewage in front of their customers is going to confuse that with a mild warning. It was food policy enforced by public disgust and a complete annihilation of dignity. 27. Colonial Americans had a punishment called riding the rail. And no, it was not a pleasant transportation service. A scammer, cheat, or other local nuisance could be forced to sit straddling a sharp wooden fence rail while a crowd carried him out of town. If that already sounds agonizing, that is because it was designed to be. You were balanced on a narrow edge, mocked by everyone around you, and physically tormented with every step the carriers took. It was a mob punishment, which meant law and entertainment got mixed together in deeply unhealthy proportions. The crowd was not just removing you, they were enjoying the removal. Riding the rail worked because it turned exile into a public event and pain into a civic joke. Colonial communities often lacked patience for polished legal drama. Sometimes they simply wanted a fraud, humiliated so thoroughly that the road out of town itself became part of the sentence. 28. The cangiei in imperial China was a punishment device so simple and cruel it almost feels mathematically efficient. It was a huge wooden board locked around a criminal's neck, often heavy enough to make movement miserable and wide enough that the wearer could not reach his own mouth to feed himself. So punishment became a public performance of helplessness. You stood, shuffled, struggled, and relied on others for the most basic act of survival. In a society where public order and visible hierarchy mattered deeply, that was devastating. The cangiei did not need blood to do its work. Its power came from weight, exposure, and dependence. Everyone could see your disgrace, and you could feel it every second in your shoulders, spine, and hunger. It was portable humiliation engineered with brutal practicality. Sometimes the most terrifying punishments are not dramatic. They are simply heavy, slow, and impossible to ignore. 29. In some colonial American settlements, authorities understood that shame could be made architectural. If a family was caught trading with pirates, one punishment was forcing them to paint their house black, turning the building into a permanent billboard of disgrace. Not a fine hidden in paperwork. Not a quiet reprimand. Your entire home became the town's visual reminder that your household had done business with criminals. Every visitor, every neighbor, every child walking past got the message instantly. It was punishment that outlived the actual event because the stain remained right there on the street. And that was the genius. A prison sentence ends. A black house keeps talking. Colonial communities depended heavily on reputation, trust, and public image, so this kind of punishment hit hard. You were not just embarrassed for a day. You were forced to live inside your own scandal, which is a very effective way to make gossip immortal. 30. The wooden horse was one of those military punishments that sounds almost simple until you imagine your body actually meeting the device. The victim was forced to sit astride a narrow triangular beam, often with weights tied to the ankles to increase pressure, and left there for hours. There was no heroic struggle, no dramatic chase, just slow, grinding agony concentrated in the most unfortunate area possible. Armies in Europe loved this method because it punished visibly, painfully, and with a cruel sort of mechanical neatness. The soldier was elevated for everyone to see, reduced to a lesson in disobedience balanced on geometry. The longer he sat, the worse it became, and that was the entire philosophy. Discipline through prolonged suffering, delivered with carpenter-level efficiency. You disobeyed, so now a plank shaped like a very angry roof gets to explain why that was a mistake. 31. Tarring and feathering has entered popular memory as a sort of rough comic punishment, which is misleading in the way history often becomes misleading after enough distance. In reality, it was brutal mob violence. Tax collectors and other hated figures could be stripped, smeared with hot pine tar, then covered in feathers until they looked like grotesque birds while crowds mocked and paraded them around. The image is so absurd that people forget the physical horror. Hot tar burns skin, tears hair, and leaves a person in agony long after the laughter fades. But that absurdity was part of the weapon. The victim was not only hurt, he was transformed into a living joke. Communities used it to say, "You are not one of us, and we will make your body carry that message." It was punishment as spectacle, cruelty disguised in ridiculous costume, which somehow made it even more vicious. 32. Shot drill was a masterpiece of institutional boredom used as punishment in prisons and military settings. The prisoner had to pick up a heavy cannonball, carry it across the yard, place it down exactly where instructed, then carry it back again. Then repeat. And repeat. And repeat until time itself seemed offended. There was no skill to learn, no product to show, no satisfying ending, just a loop of weight and futility. The brilliance, if we are being dark about it, was that the task looked orderly and harmless from the outside while quietly grinding down the body and mind. Every lift drained strength. Every step underlined the meaninglessness. It was labor designed not to build anything except obedience and despair. Institutions have always loved this trick. Make punishment look practical while ensuring the real result is psychological erosion with a side of shoulder pain. 33. The half-hanged punishment was terrifying precisely because it stopped short of the neat ending people usually expect from an execution. A criminal would be hanged only until unconsciousness or near death, then cut down and allowed to survive. In some cases, this happened because of legal technicalities, mercy, or changing circumstances. In others, the surviving trauma itself became part of the punishment. Imagine waking up after feeling the rope close, after hearing the crowd, after crossing right up to the edge of death and then being shoved back into ordinary life. Your body is damaged, your mind is wrecked, and everyone knows exactly what happened to you. It turned punishment into an aftershock that could last for years. Death would have been final. This was worse in a colder, more strategic way. It left the victim alive to remember every second and to carry that memory around like an invisible noose. So now, I want names. Which punishment on this list was secretly genius? And which one was just a psychopath with official paperwork? And what insane historical punishment did I miss that absolutely deserved a place here? Drop it in the comments, then like the video and subscribe for more history that proves humans have always been dangerously creative.